So thank you very much, Kilian, for taking the time to talk with us today. Just for everyone else out there, my name is Mo Chatterjee. I'm a specialist sustainability manager at Carney. Spend a lot of time thinking about the circular economy, in particular the electronics value chain. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board today. Maybe a hand over to you to say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, hi Mo, really great to be here today. My name is Kilian. I'm one of the founders of Refurbed. We are an online marketplace for sustainable consumption, existing since 6 years, are active in 13 European countries, market leader in Germany, Austria, Sweden, Ireland, Denmark, and Netherlands. And we really want to change the way people consume. Originally, we're coming from the electronics part, so specifically refurbishing smartphones, notebooks, tablets, but even now moved to household goods, for example, Hoovers. You can buy from us Reglet devices, e-bikes, but also coffee machines. So we really want to change the way people consume and increase the circular economy for everyone by our offering. And so happy to speak about it today with you.
Awesome. Well, let's start talking about consumption. I mean, changing the way that people actually consume. Why don't we talk a little bit about refurbished? And we start with electronics, right? Because that was where you guys started, and it's kind of the DNA, I guess, of the company. What are refurbished electronics? Why are they becoming so popular?
When we started 6 years ago, it was still like a really niche. Like a lot of people knew about refurbished products, and we really want to try our part and do our best for enabling making refurbished product the new normal. And I think since we started it and also made more visibility and put more awareness on refurbished products, more and more people understood the advantages of it. And for this reason, it was a strong growth over the last couple of years, depending on a couple of mega trends, of course, historically sustainability, but also quite recently the topic about higher inflation. Therefore, the wallet sizes of the people is decreasing. So you think much more how much you can spend on a device. All of this profits the development and the growth of the refurbished market in general.
And in terms of the product, you mentioned a couple already. How do you see the development of refurbished products? And you can start in the electronic space, maybe move to some other ones. I mean, for a consumer like myself, we've seen refurbished mobile phones on the market for quite a long time. But my understanding is that's certainly not the extent of it today, and there's increasing consumer interest for other product categories.
Yeah, so originally, like refurbishment theoretically exists since like 18 to 20 years in the electronic industry or consumer electronic industry. It originally came from the PC industry. So the time back when we didn't work with laptops, but with like standalone PCs really. And since then, a lot of things changed, of course, because it was more, let's say, I would say 18 years ago, it was more the nerds, the specific experts in the specific field, which purchased refurbished products, but not the general society. And then around 8 to 10 years ago, it started that the first smartphones were refurbished, and this literally led to the widespread general society purchasing now refurbished products. So we started with smartphones and notebooks, and then afterwards we started with tablets, smartwatches, for example, audio products like Apple AirPods or something like this. And then we moved forward to other categories because it was really interesting to see that since this consumer electronics market specifically increased of awareness and customer share as well, then also other product categories like small, medium domestic appliance, like for example, coffee machines, Hoovers, and so on, I also realized, hey, there's a market for it and there's customer demand.
So, which kind of product categories do you predict seeing in the next couple of years moving into that refurbishment space?
Yeah, so for example, what we see is sports products is really interesting product as well. Like we have already e-bikes, we have in general bicycles on our platforms. I think something really interesting is, I mean, I'm living in Austria right now. Skiing equipment, for example, could be something really interesting. What already exists, but more in the B2B space, so not what we are doing ourselves, but is medical equipment of refurbishing. Because when we're talking about big machineries, which costs like 1 million or more in production, of course, refurbishing them probably has still a really high value of these devices. So there's a lot of development in different areas happening. I think then the question at one point is more about how is the definition of refurbishment, right? Because we have remanufacturing, you have refurbishment, you have repair. There are a lot of different terms used for increasing the lifetime, adding additional circles of life for these products. And it always depends in a bit in which product categories we're talking about, because we can also theoretically talking about furnitures which are repaired and then having a second life or something, or something like this. So I think it's not only about the classic refurbishment with electronic parts, but also it's much more about circular economy in general, and the understanding that if something is broken or has a defect in whatever term it is, it can be and it has to be replaced and repaired.
Interesting you mentioned medical equipment and, let's say, the big, large machinery, industrial machinery that's very expensive to make. And of course, their refurbishment can make a lot of sense. And one of the things you also mentioned was remanufacturing. And this is this idea of really putting a standard on the way that that the remanufacturing or the refurbishment process is done, to give it a stamp of approval from some sort of authority that it is basically as good as new. And that kind of brings me to the question of trust, right? Because when you have this stamp of approval that you see from, let's say, one of the institutions like an ISO or something, which could potentially say, hey, this product is as good as new. We currently don't really have that in all of the refurbished space. And I think we see consumer trust issues, not only on the functionality side, but also with certain connected devices on the data protection side. What's your take on those concerns?
So we see exactly the same, right? So I think the biggest problem right now why not, let's say, everyone is buying refurbished products is mainly driven by the reasoning that many customers are not really thinking how or understanding how that works, right? Because a lot of people think, or they historically know, that they purchased a device on this peer-to-peer platforms, like in Germany, for example, eBay Kleinanzeigen, where you go to a street and you hand over your device to the other person on the side, getting maybe a cash money with it. But you have no warranty, right? There's no security. You have no idea what is with the data of the previous owner, what is happening with your data. And I think it's really important to also explain that this peer-to-peer transaction of just selling your device to a private person has nothing to do with what we are doing. So we are working with partners in Europe, which are professional refurbishers. They use the same machinery than the manufacturers for their production of the devices. When they do the data deletion, it's not just resetting the device, but it's literally going through a certified process of data deletion. A lot of the products which we are selling on our platform are, for example, purchased from big corporations, financial institutions like big banks, which have the highest possible data security standards from data regulation point of the European Commission and European Union. So that means that if they are able to sell the devices to our partners, to the refurbishers to refurbish them, then a private person doesn't have to be afraid, right, that their data is not secured. So I think this is an important element of education of the people. But the second point that you pointed out regarding that there's no label, right? So there's also no definition. So when we're talking about, let's say, a new product has to be originally manufactured and sealed. So it's not allowed that it was ever opened. Not even the plastic paper around it should be opened. If that is happening, the product cannot be sold as new anymore, just from the definition of the regulatory part.
In terms of the actual facilities or manufacturing facilities or remanufacturing or refurbishment facilities, whatever you want to call them, that these guys are using, you said they're the same as basically what the OEMs are doing. So it sounds like they're pretty technologically advanced. It sounds like there's, it's not people sitting in a warehouse taking things apart manually, right? Which is sometimes what you see. There was a Wall Street Journal video recently, and it looked like a super manual process. Can you tell us a bit more about the technical innovation that actually exists on the refurbishment side?
Yeah, so I think, it's still partly both, right? So you still have people who are supervising, for example, machinery. There are still some processes which have to be tested also by human beings. So they are, for example, then semi-automated. So, for example, the checkup of when we talk about a smartphone, the checkup of individual components, like is the speaker working, is the microphone working, how are the pixels on the touchscreen? It's like a semi-automated process where a machinery guides a human being through the process of checking, just to ensure that, like, do you hear sound? Is the sound working well, right? Can you call someone? Are all of these thousands of pixels on the smartphone screen active, right, and functional? So it's often a semi-automated process, but as you stated, of course, there are machineries created to check specific things, like how is the condition, so how is the outside look of the device? Are there scratches on it? Replacing of screens are then automated by robots. So there's a lot of development happening, and specifically also machineries to let's say, reduce the manual process of refurbishing a device.
When I speak to people on this topic, right, often the response I get is, oh yeah, like refurbished electronics, like they would be electronics that are bought somewhere in some high income country, so in like Western Europe. They would be probably refurbished somewhere in like a middle income country somewhere, maybe somewhere in Eastern Europe or something, and then they'd be sold to a low income country, so somewhere in like around the Sahara in Africa, something like this. This is often what I hear, but it's not what I see currently happening. And from what I'm hearing from you, Kilian, it's also not what you're seeing. Is that right?
Exactly. So, I mean, when we're talking about literally refurbished products, and I mean, you have to differentiate probably a bit because there are, of course, products, let's say, when we're talking about iPhones, iPhone 4, iPhone 5, iPhone 6, which is not really possible to use anymore from a software perspective. So the software obsolescence is there happening of the manufacturer. These products you cannot really sell anymore in Europe because, the let's say the society in Europe cannot really use this device anymore. But if these devices are still functional, then these devices, for example, get sold in Africa or Asia. But when we're looking into, let's say, for example, our biggest partners selling on Refurbed, they are based in Germany, France, Ireland, Sweden. So they are not in this low income countries, but the majority of them are even in the higher parts or industry countries with more higher incomes in Europe. But it's much more about the skill set and the business, of course, have to build a really efficient structure from a perspective of moving these products really fast so that they make a profit out of it despite the high employee costs. But the interesting part, I think, is where the products are coming from. And this is the main reason why these products are so attractive and also possible to refurbish them in higher paid countries. It is the majority of products coming from businesses. So big companies which are using their company notebooks, company smartphones for 1 or 2 years, they normally have really short cycles, and then they sell it to a refurbisher with a big discount because they just want to get it away from the balance sheet. And so putting a big discount on it and selling them on an average price. And then, of course, sometimes you have products which are literally like new. You maybe even only have to clean them and delete the data, but you do not even have to replace one component because it's maybe 5 days used, right? And then just like switch for the next circle in the company.
It kind of begs the question, though, right? You have this system which is almost like the car market, right? Where you have these premium devices that basically get either sold or leased out to businesses who then use them for a limited period of time, and then they sell it on to the secondary market, and there's still a very strong secondary market, and often like end consumers are willing to pay for, they're willing to pay for premium devices, but not, to buy them at that price that would cost brand new. But I guess in terms of that, going back to that sustainable consumption that you talked about earlier, how do you see that developing? Because we do need then this flow of new devices coming into the market, unless you can keep products in use indefinitely, which is probably unlikely based on the current model we have.
Yeah, so I mean, the main reason why products literally lose functionality is the software nowadays. So software obsolescence is one of the biggest problems we're having because what we also see, for example, in our customer base, literally from the student who buys his first device for as possible cheap price, also cares about sustainability, wants to need a notebook for university, up to grandparent generations, which they use their iPhone 8 for the last 4 years. Now it breaks down in a way that it cannot be repaired anymore, but they do not want to have a new one. They know how this one works and know how this thing feels. So they want to have exactly the same thing again, and it doesn't exist as new, right? So, but this software obsolescence is really a big problem because theoretically a device could be refurbished, repaired to last for 10 years or longer. But normally the software update cycle ends like after 5 to 7 years, depending, of course, also on the provider. And so then even if you have a perfect functional device, it loses the use case because if you then cannot, for example, communicate with your friends anymore through WhatsApp or whatever app you might use, it's not possible to use anymore this device. The device loses functionality even if it's working greatly, right? So this is a bit of a pity, I would say, and also, of course, something I think also has to be looked at on a regulatory base. But in the end of the day, when you ask about we need new devices, yeah, theoretically, of course, or yes, we need to refurbish them. But if you look on the market size of refurbishment compared to new, it's not even 10%, right? So there's still so much development of growth in this market possible until theoretically we would reach a point which means we cannot refurbish anymore because there are not enough devices there, which I think will take us a long, long time, and it would be great if we reach this point. But I also do not think that we are there yet. I mean, also when we look on the customer group, there's still like a big customer group which says, I want to have the newest device. And if I want to have always the newest device, like there's a launch event of a new smartphone and you want to have this one, it doesn't exist refurbished. So the refurbished cycle, of course, always kicks in 1 or 2 years after the launch of the product, because then, as I mentioned before, companies, for example, returning this newest devices for the next generation, and then it floats back into the market. So you're always lacking 1 or 2 generations behind on the refurbished industry, and this will always be the case.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's maybe finish off just by looking a little bit broader. I mean, the refurbishment industry, I think, it's a really good example of a truly sustainable business model, and we hear about sustainable business models get chucked out a lot, that kind of terminology, but it's kind of pure sustainability in the sense of you take a resource or an asset which typically wouldn't necessarily be used any further, could potentially go to waste, and you basically revalorize it. You add value to the physical product, and find a way to sell it again. So I mean, it's great from a business perspective because you're like making money out of something that would otherwise be waste, and it's great from a sustainability perspective because you are basically you're reducing the requirement for new products coming onto the market because you're increasing the lifespan of products that are already on it. But how can more companies develop models like this or leverage opportunities that already exist? Because I think for a lot of them, it's something which is new, it's scary, it's different, and we don't see mass adoption from, let's say, the incumbents.
I absolutely agree. I think, I mean, the great thing of our business model is that we literally combine profitability and sustainability, because a lot of other business models, if you produce more of a product or you make more revenue, it kind of harms at one point the environment. In our case, for every additional refurbished product we are selling, we're reducing additional CO2 emissions, we're reducing additional electronic waste. So when we're reporting our success numbers, it doesn't really make a difference if we would like report revenue or if we report, for example, CO2 emission reduction, because it's literally one-on-one, it goes hand in hand, which of course is extremely motivating for us as founders of the business, but also for our whole employee body and colleagues of our business, because it's a completely different perspective on motivation. So I think this is an important factor, and I think this is something which also can be motivating for other business maybe to shift their personal point of view and strategy on it. I think when I'm looking to different other businesses, what they could do, the big problem that we're currently having is also the structure of how businesses are working, and we're talking about specifically like the big corporates, which are stock traded companies, for example. The incentives for, let's say, the management of the businesses are short-term incentives, right? That the stock price is increasing, and if, let's say, a big corporate would now shift from their linear economy that they are created to a more circular business model, most likely will result in short-term losses. So you really have to, they really have to understand on the willingness to understand that the stock price will crash for 2-3 years until the circular economy new business model kicks in, and then it goes up again. But the model, how it's created from incentivization of the management of the companies, of the investors as well, is not built up on the system. So I think there has to be like a mindset shift as well. But on the other hand, I'm convinced that there won't be successful business models which have not sustainability in their core strategy of the business. And I'm not meaning like this when we talk about sustainability strategies, like the bolt-on strategy where you just adding CSR or something as an additional department into marketing or PR to ensure that it sounds great for your business, like greenwashing in a hard to say way. I think this is a big problem. But also there, for example, the European Commission is currently working on directives to reduce the risk of green greenwashing claims, right? So there's a lot of things going on right now. But what we see in the society is that customers are more and more aware what they want to buy. They talk about it, they take care about it. And this, in my opinion, strongly means that we will have a huge shift in consumption going to trustworthy, sustainable business models. And this is also, from my perspective, therefore, the requirement for businesses to really understand that will happen and that they have to shift how they're operating. And so this is for this reason, I think every company must now think about what they're doing to be successful also in the long term.
Excellent, Kilian. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking. I could talk for a lot longer with you, but unfortunately we're time constrained. Thank you very much for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Mo. It was a pleasure to be here.